Hello everyone and welcome. This is another video in my Procreate for Beginners series. Today we're going to be looking at the brush library and all of the brushes that come with Procreate. If you haven't seen my other videos in this series, I do have a bunch that came out before this, and I have a few more that are coming out after this as well. And those are all in my Procreate and digital art playlist. I will link all of the relevant videos and playlists in the cards, in the description, and also some of them at the end of the video. But all of those videos will be in that playlist, the Procreate and Digital Art. So let's get started with the brush library. Alright, so we're looking at the brush library today. Now I went over some of this in my Procreate for Beginners brushes video. We're going to do a little bit of a recap on some of that, and then show you what I mean by brush library. So for the brushes, there's these three tools right here. There's the paintbrush, the smudge brush, and the eraser tool. So you can select them. The one that's blue is selected, but you can go through and select. So then once you have it selected, if you hit it again, the brush library will come up. And then there's all these categories over here. That's what we're going to go through today. This one's recent. I don't actually have anything in here because I kind of cleared it out. But you'll see that as we go. These first three categories here are actually brushes that I made, so we're going to kind of go over that more in the studio video that we're doing next, brush studio video. But these three are ones that I have made and that I use, for whatever I do. And then the rest of these down here that don't have the paint stroke mark, whatever it is here, that's in the logo of Procreate, there's all these other like icons. Those are the ones that come with Procreate. So those are the ones you'll see, like if you download Procreate yourself, if you have already. But all these categories here, so sketching, inking, drawing, painting, artistic, calligraphy, airbrushing, textures, abstract, charcoals, elements, spray paints, materials, vintage, luminance, industrial, organic, and water. So all of those. And then you'll see the recent category as well on top. And unless you've imported brushes in, you're not going to see anything like this or created your own. Again, we'll talk more about that in the next video when we go over the brush studio, because you can organize your stuff, and we'll talk about that then. But so these are the categories I'm going to go through today. So just to show you, going into sketching, so there's, in this category of sketching, there's all these brushes over here. Sometimes there's more, you have to scroll up. But I'm going to show you like what they look like. I don't use all of these, but I have tried them out occasionally. But I'll show you like more what they're used for and what they look like, and you can kind of decide, oh, I could use that for this, or and just keep the location in your mind of where it is. So that's kind of what the purpose of this video is. But anyway, so I actually just want to really quickly, I'm going to do this again in a minute, but first let me just do this, and then I just want to get a couple of these brushes on my recent category so you can see what I mean. So if you go to recent, all of those brushes that I just used are there. And something I showed you in the brushes video, the intro, the Procreate for Beginners brushes video, you can slide this to the left, and the middle option there, pin, you can pin it if it's something that you use often, so you can always find it very quickly in your recent menu. Otherwise you'd have to go like, what category was that? Oh yeah, and then you have to go. Otherwise this is like a shortcut, so you can pin it, and you can unpin it by doing the same thing. And if you do find, it'll take you to where it is too. So if you couldn't remember what category it is. And if you do clear, you can clear it out of your recents if you want to do that. So I'll just do that anyway, because that's the way I had it before. But anyway, so going back here, I'm going to undo with two fingers. Alright, so in this category, the sketching category, the first one that should be, from the Procreate on your library, these are all like pencils or crayons or pastels that you would use mainly to do like sketching before you're going to do something more permanent, like kind of to plan out what you're doing. So there's all different sizes and different kind of textures that they have. That's basically the difference. the pastels and the crayon obviously are much bigger and got a lot more texture to them. But like all these pencils are, they're pretty much similar. They just have a little bit of a different texture and sometimes a little bit different features. So it also depends on how big your brush is going to be, which again you can change over here with this slider, and this is opacity here, the one on the bottom. So I mean, I kind of did this already. We're using black, that's fine. Like there isn't much to say about these other than they're kind of like a pencil. So that was peppermint. Derwent. You know, it's kind of similar. There isn't much of a difference. Like the difference is kind of a little bit in the texture. Like this one's a little bigger. I think this is the same size, but it's a little darker and a little bigger. So I'm going to erase those for now. And technical pencil. I mean, obviously if you make these bigger, they're going to show up a little darker and bigger. Depends on, you know, how big you want your lines to be. So, like I said, these are very, very similar. This is, just from the thumbnail here, you can tell that this one's a little wider. It's probably going to have some pressure sensitivity to it with the pencil. So you see that when I'm pushing down on those downstrokes, it's darker and it's bigger. And that you can only really get with the Apple Pencil or another stylus that is similar, that has the pressure sensitivity to it. Again, I've never used anything like that. The only one I've used is the Apple Pencil. It's the only one I can vouch for, but I've heard you can use other ones. But anyway, not much different between those. So then this is a soft pastel, and then an oil pastel. The size changed a little bit, but you see. And then artist crayon. You know, different textures, again, depending on what kind of look you want. But mostly these are used to kind of frame out your artwork before you actually do the actual illustration or whatever you're doing. So that's what those are for, basically. All right, so looking at the inking category now. Yeah, so these are all about like ink pens or markers that give the kind of inky look to your art. I don't know how to describe it very much, but anyway, so again, looking at some of these thumbnails about like what it looks like, the ones that kind of get bigger in the middle is a good indication of the ones that have that pressure sensitivity. So when you like put little pressure, it's going to be more small, and then when you start putting more pressure on, it's going to be bigger, which when we get to the gel pen, it's kind of opposite. You'll see. But anyway, again, a lot of these you can get an idea of what they look like from the thumbnail, but a lot of them are just kind of different sizes and different like textures inside. Like this one's got that little streak in it. This one's got like 5 or 6 different strokes of ink in it rather than like a full one together, basically. But just to show you what they look like. So this is Mercury. All right, then Baskerville. I don't know why that's all the way up like that. But what I'm doing here is I'm putting more pressure on those downstrokes, these right here. So you can see it gets a little darker and bigger. And that would have done the same thing too, I just didn't do it there. Inca's got that kind of stroke in the middle. A lot of these things you're going to see kind of how they were made in the brush studio in my next video. You're going to see like how these different properties kind of showed up in the brush studio. So it's kind of hard to explain it right now because we haven't talked about it yet. You know what I mean? So You'll see it more in the next video. Pandani, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's got sort of these horizontal lines in it as you draw. Tinderbox is just a little more rough. Syrup is going to be a little smoother. And this is the one that's got the separate strokes in it, so you can see. And then that was thylacine. Fine tip is going to be a very fine tip monoline brush, or, well, technically a brush, but it's like an ink pen with a fine tip. Just curiosity how big this gets. So you can see this one's really small, even with it all the way turned up. But it's a little darker when it's all the way turned up. Technical pen. Gel pen. So most of us have used a gel pen at some point in our lives. I actually am not a big fan of them. But you can see how when I'm pushing down further, it's getting like there's less coming out. And then when I'm going on my upstrokes and I'm not pushing as much, there's more ink. It's kind of the opposite of what you would normally see. So then ink bleed. This kind of gives a look of like you'd be writing on a paper that's very like porous, and like the ink bleeds into the paper even though you haven't technically like drawn like that far out. The ink kind of bleeds out. Studio pen. This one doesn't have as much of a difference with pressure, if you can see from, like, it's a little less tapered, or I guess, yeah, it's a little more consistent between the downstrokes and the upstrokes, but it's still got a little bit of a difference. But then, like, compared to like syrup, you know, there's more of a difference, like in the transitions is what I'm trying to say, like between the downstroke and the upstroke, with the least pressure and more pressure. Whereas with this one, it's a little more gradual rather than like a quick change here. You know what I mean? So that was studio pen. Dry ink. Again, these are just like textures. Jasinski ink. Some of these I don't know how to pronounce, I'm sorry. And then marker is like when you're drawing with a marker, basically, and it's all monoline. There is no pressure sensitivity there. I can get real fine and real large, but it's got that markery look to it, you know, drawing with your Crayola washable markers or any other markers. But anyway, that is that category. So then the drawing category is the next one. I'm going to start with Little Pine. So these are all like very textured brushes. So Little Pine, again, it's got that pressure sensitivity, gloaming. This is on the large side. Freycinet. That one's going to be large. So get some room here. Blackburn. It's got that very thick, like, pressure sensitivity when you push further. Evolve. It's going to be very choppy. Even the brush isn't even that big either. Eagle Hawk. Now this one, when you have more pressure, it kind of shows like a light on the sides there, you know, like it's showing up on the sides where I kind of hit the thing there. But like this, when you're going up, it doesn't show. But like anytime you put pressure on, it's putting like a little bit of ink or paint like on the sides. And it's also got, like if you see on the thumbnail in here, like it's kind of tapering off on the ends. And this is another thing you'll see when we go through the studio, brush studio. But like as you start it, it's lighter. And then when you kind of end, it's also light, depending on how you end, I guess. So that's something you'll see in some of these brushes as well. Again, you can kind of tell from the thumbnail. This one's got like a thicker belly to it in the middle. And you can kind of barely see as you go up, like with the upstrokes. You have to put a little pressure on to see those. And then sticks. Again, you can see the cursor, like this is the shape that it's following. And again, you'll know more about the shape when we go through the studio. But you can see like it was getting bigger as you put more pressure on. Again, with these two, you can see that. That was Morilla. This is Copperhead. A lot of strokes together, being entwined together. All right, so that was those. And again, I don't use all of these myself, so I'm just kind of going over what they do, and if they look attractive to you, you know where to find them. So these are all, so we're going to start with the round brush and flat brush. I'm going to show you both of them at the same time. So round brush is, you know, you can see that shape is kind of a circle, and then the flat brush is going to be like a rectangle. And you can see like the difference is just that shape makes in your brush. So obviously, like, you know, if you were to buy a paintbrush set, you know, there'll be some that have like a flat brush head to them, and then there's some that are round. So that's the difference with those two. And then there's also like the different kinds of paint. So there's acrylic. And a lot of these too are kind of how they layer on top of each other. Like even if going a different color. And then so that's acrylic. This is like watered down acrylic, wet acrylic. So see, it's not as dark unless you keep putting layers on. And then, okay, there's jagged brush. So this is like what it sounds like, brush that's kind of jagged, like it's been used a bit, and it's got, whether intentionally or it's just old. So you've got like the brush hairs kind of being jagged while you're painting, rather than like maybe you didn't clean your brush very well and it's got like this weird shape to it when you try to paint with it again. Salamanca. This one you can tell has got that tapering to it. So again, and it's kind of rectangular or flat. And there is that pressure sensitivity. And then this one is flat, more flat, but it is more solid. Like I'm using different pressures, and they're all kind of showing up the same. So this doesn't really have that pressure sensitivity to it. So if you didn't want to have that, that would be a good option. Spectra, it's another sort of flat one. It's got that pressure sensitivity. It's a little more smooth though than the Salamanca. And then Tamar is definitely more textured. and it does have that pressure sensitivity. So then there's Old Brush, which is kind of similar to the jagged brush that we were using before, but it's like a brush that's been used and used and used, and it's losing its hairs and stuff, and you keep using it depending on, you know, what kind of look you want. But it gives you that, you know, textured look. So this is dry brush. So again, this is if you weren't gonna like dip your brush in water before using it. So you got that kind of scratchy look to it. And this one kind of really changes not only the darkness with the pressure, but it changes the size. So it gets a little bigger when you push harder. And then stucco is like a texture. You're going to see more of these texture kind of things as we go through. And then oil paint. So it's just like the difference between painting with oil paint rather than acrylic on a canvas. You know, it's a lot like wetter. It takes longer to dry. And this is if you mix turpentine in, it's going to give you a different kind of look to it. And then you got gouache, which is kind of a mid between acrylic and watercolor. Fresco, it's got a very distinct look to it, if you know what fresco is. And then there is a watercolor brush down here, although I'm not a big fan of Procreate's watercolor brushes. And then, you know, obviously, because we talked about there's smudge brush up here, you can kind of smudge with your watercolor stuff. And there is like a category for water that we're going to go through later too. It's kind of similar. But anyway, people have made other watercolor brushes that you can buy or acquire in some way. But anyway, the next category is artistic. So these are going to be, you know, more painting type brushes, but they have like more texture to them. So Wild Light. So this one is kind of like where you put more pressure on it, and like spreads it out more, and it makes it like thinner as in like the paint is thinner, but the stroke is actually wider. So you see, like, this is like lighter when I was pushing down rather than when I wasn't pushing down as much. It was dark and it was kind of contained. When you push it out more, it gets thinner, the paint itself, but the stroke gets larger. Then Aurora is like paint droplets basically, and it gets bigger as you push more. And Leatherwood, you know, this is a little more texture but paint droplets, and the same kind of thing where it's got that pressure sensitivity. Hearts, I would say this is a little more cloudy. There's more cloud-ish paint brushes in this, we'll see, but like this is kind of similar, like you can make clouds with. And then there's Taralia. This is also kind of cloudy, but I think it's got a little bit more of that pressure sensitivity with the opacity. And then Plimsoll. This is more monoline, also more flat. Does have the pressure sensitivity with opacity. And it's got that texture in it. Old Beach. Similar kind of thing to the last one, except like this one is another one where you kind of, when you push more, you can see it kind of spreads the paint out more, but it's not as opaque. And then on your upstrokes, when you're not pushing down very hard, at least when I'm not, when I do it, it barely shows up. So it's kind of not exactly the same where that other one where it kind of pushed it out. The upstrokes that I didn't push as much were showing up just regular solid. This one is kind of doing where you're not pushing as much, it's not really showing up, but then when you are pushing up, it's giving more paint, but then it's like pushing it out more as well. So again, depends on what look you're going for all this. So Larapuna, it's got the opacity, pressure sensitivity. It's kind of like a sideways rectangle as a shape, and it kind of jitters all over the place. Again, all these things will make more sense when we do the Brush Studio. Sassafras. Again, all these pretty much have that pressure sensitivity where it gets more opaque the more you push down, and the size does increase for a lot of these as well. And it's all just like in the texture, like what kind of texture you want to your paint. And then Qual, or Quol, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's very large. Let's see if we make it a little smaller. So again, the same sort of thing. It's just different shapes that it's starting with, and the same like opacity, different differential when you go up with little pressure up and then more pressure down, which is what I've been doing. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can do more pressure up and little down as well, but that's the way I do it normally because I'm a calligraphy person, which is normally what you do. Speaking of calligraphy, these are the calligraphy brushes it comes with. So these are, again, most of these are, except for monoline, are going to be like the pressure sensitivity, because again, with calligraphy, you're making like certain strokes have the thicker lines. So like this first one is all about texture, and it's not really, there isn't a lot of pressure sensitivity with that one either, but it's got that like streakiness to it. And then Odeon or however you say it, it's just like the shape that you're seeing, and there's a little bit of color changing with the pressure. So that's another thing that we're going to talk about when we go to the studio. Like you can change the color with different things, like with the pressure or with how fast you go sometimes too. So we'll see that in Brush Studio. Monoline is going to be, just the same no matter what. And you can just make that bigger if you want by the brush size slider. And then chalk, it's going to give you that chalky appearance, but it does have that pressure sensitivity. So it's kind of like a chalk marker that has like a brush tip, basically, so you can push more for more to come out. Blotchy, the more pressure you put on, it's going to give you that blotchy, larger, more opaque appearance. Streaks, again, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's giving you kind of a streaky look. Even when you do like put less pressure on, there's still that streaky look. It's just everything gets bigger as you put more pressure on. Water pen, you can see it looks kind of like watered down paint as you go down. Like if you don't put a lot of pressure on, it doesn't do much, but the more pressure you put on, it gives you that kind of waterish look to it. Shale brush. And this all has to do with like the shape of the pen. But it's got that opacity and size getting bigger with more pressure. And brush pen. So if you ever used like a brush pen or a brush marker, this is the way a lot of people do learn calligraphy to begin with. Again, those upstrokes are thin, and then going down and putting more pressure on, gets more opaque and more large, just as it would if you were using a brush pen. So then script is similar, but it's just a little thicker overall. And the shape's a little different. So then that is those. Let me erase that. Then going to airbrushing. So this is as if you were using an airbrush. So it's got that brushed look to it. Like airbrushed, I mean. Like you're... And then, it goes from soft, medium, hard, and then soft blend, medium blend, hard blend, medium hard blend. And then soft airbrush, medium airbrush. These are all very similar. It goes over like in the soft, it's got like softened edges, you see. And then it's very opaque in the middle. And then medium kind of is very opaque, but it doesn't have as soft of edges. And then when you get harder and harder, like it's more opaque, and the edges aren't really, like it's more precise if you're trying to draw with an airbrush. Whereas the softer one gives like the softer edges. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not going to go through all these because they're kind of similar, but these are a little smaller, soft airbrush as opposed to soft brush. But kind of the same thing where the softer edges on the soft, and then the medium is still kind of soft but not as soft, and then the hard is just basically opaque. So I tend to use the hard airbrush for my eraser tool when I use it. So then, all right, so textures, like we're going to start getting into texture brushes. So this is going to show you like a texture behind where you paint, like a defined texture. So that was tessellated. This is Tarkine. Again, they all have kind of different looks to them. Depends on if you want to use them or not. Kurawong. Again, hope I'm saying that right. Signet. Hope I'm saying that right. These are all just different textures. Again, if you want to incorporate them into making your art, it's up to you. You can always change the size and everything. Dove Lake. Just kind of showing you what you can do. Obviously, I'm only using black. You can use different colors too. But these next ones that kind of take up the entire thumbnail, they're also going to kind of take up the entire screen. I mean, some of those did too, the texture brush, the ones we went to, but like this is kind of like you could make like a grid if you didn't want to use the guide for some reason. You could make a grid to kind of, with this, obviously you have to watch where you're putting your pencil because it's not going to show up exactly the same. But like if you wanted to use this as your graph paper or whatever, and then make another layer and then draw on top of it, you could do that. You could also transform this where you could make it bigger or smaller, whatever you need. So just to show you. All right, and then, so this is the same kind of thing. Decimals is, it's polka dots. Diagonals, it's going to give you diagonals on the screen. And then Victorian, it's going to give you that Victorian kind of wallpaper in the back. If you don't lift your pencil, it should be okay. You can just kind of do the whole thing. I just missed over there because of the sliders, but you can do that. And then there's like a wood texture, wood paneling. If you wanted that behind your art for some reason, you could do that, or as part of your art. Then there's like cubes. I picked up my pencil because of the slider thing again. But anyway, you can do that. rosette. So this one's got some pressure sensitivity to it. Like it gets, all those dots get closer together when you put more pressure on it. And then grunge. All right, so then there's abstract. Like these are, again, basically different shapes that you're kind of starting with. Storm Bay. Like this one is kind of lighter in the middle, and then like it's got those kind of defined edges as far as color goes, but then like the actual shape is kind of goopy. That's the word I'm looking for. Like it's not defined as in shape, it's defined as in like the color on the outline, but like the middle is more light, but it kind of has this like 3D look to it. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. Like it looks like a splotch of paint, basically. Then there's waveform, membrane, all kinds of different kind of shapes that you can do, textures that come with Procreate that you can use, and you can of course make your own. We're going to talk about that in the next video. Hexavector, marble, got like a marbly look, Opticon, circles, and the colors kind of changing with the pressure. And then spicule. Like you can see this is kind of a line that's changing like its position every time. And again, this will make more sense when we start talking about the brush studio and how brushes work. But basically, short version is you take a shape and or a texture and you kind of repeat it along a line. So, and then there's things you can do to it other than that, but like you're taking the shape and it's kind of, you know, every time you can change how often it does it as well. But like every time it goes along, it stamps like a shape down, which is how it kind of goes together. And when you put them closer together, like it gives kind of a smoother appearance, but these are kind of stretched out a little bit and you can see it's like that line. And then you can make it, you know, kind of not have the same position every time also. So that's what it's doing in this one. So again, we'll go over that more in the Brush Studio video. Then here's polygon. So it's starting with that polygon shape. It looks like a cube. And then it's doing that kind of thing where it's changing position every time. So that's how those are made, basically. But we'll talk more about that next video. So this is the charcoal. So these are all kind of similar too. You know, this one's lighter, this one's a little darker, this one's a little darker and defined, and then like, you know, they're all kind of very similar. They got that charcoal texture to them. I'll do it anyway, but they all look the same ish. There's less pressure sensitivity with the bigger, like the 6B as well. And then vine charcoal, willow charcoal, carbon stick. Let's turn it down a little. That's probably too much. Go back up a little. All right, that's a little better. Charcoal block. You know, that one's a little flatter. Burnt tree. This one's got that tapering on it. And it's got a different shape. But anyway, those are those, like they all look very similar. Depends on, you know, what exactly you're trying to do. You can experiment. And then elements. These are kind of a little more cool. This is supposed to look like smoke, so it's got that. You'd probably use like a lighter gray with this anyway if you're trying to do smoke, but it's got that smoky look. And again, probably use orange with this. This is supposed to be like flames, but it's got that pressure sensitivity where you push harder and it, you know, gets larger. But you're going to be like, if you're making flames with this, you know, you're going to be making different shapes. So, but that's something you can do. There's a water. So this is going to give you kind of a water texture. Probably use this with blue, not black, but you get the idea. And then oceans is a little different kind of water. But, you know, it gives you that texture of water, like that you can use like in the background or whatever in your painting. And then there's a driven snow one. So this one you can kind of, like if you're making like a winter scene, you can put some snow in with this. Hard rain, this gives you kind of a rain look. I think you'd want to go this way probably. But you know, you can put some rain in there, make it smaller or maybe larger. I think that is a lot of rain there. But anyway, hard rain, crystals. So you see what I mean about that shape, like you can see it, like that's that you got that crystal shape to start with, and then it's kind of being stamped along the line. Just an intro into what we're going to be doing or looking at next video in the brush studio. And again, you could, again, a little bit more of a preview, you can make it so it doesn't like change shape all the time, so it's all similar. You can do that as well. And then there's clouds, so this is kind of a cloudy appearance, which is kind of cool. You can make a cloudy background for something. Probably use a little bit of a lighter gray than dark like black, but anyway, so spray paints, again, basically what it sounds like. This is if you were trying to make like a graffiti kind of look, but that is ultra fine nozzle, fine nozzle. It starts getting a little more scattered towards the end, or on the edges, I mean, and then medium, like it's going to really start to splatter a little more, and then fat is going to give you a lot of psh, you know, and then splatter. So this is, you can kind of, you know, splatter paint all over the place. And then flicks is, you know, if you're kind of flicking, you can do this both as kind of a stamp, where if you do push a little harder, it does show up a little bigger. Or you can just, like I did in the beginning, so many strokes, you know, you can do it along the whole thing. And then burst is, this is more of a stamping kind of thing. As if you just go psh, you know. And then the next one is like a psh, but then it has a drip. So if you want, you know, again, that look somewhere on your paint without having to make it yourself, you can kind of just stamp it on there. Materials. So this is going to be a lot of texture stuff again. And actually, I think these are made for the 3D element of Procreate, which I don't really work with, but you can kind of, if you have like a 3D model of something, you can import it into Procreate. They do have a few that you can have too, like for like practice or whatever. These are for kind of like painting those, even though you can use anything to do that, but like I think these were made for those, so technically. But anyway, that was Avalon, Wattlebird. I mean, you can use them for what, you don't have to use them on the 3D, obviously. You can use them on any canvas. But again, just different textures. So that one was fern tree. This one is sawtooth. Blackwood. That one's got that kind of, where you can color in like a texture in the background for like if you're looking at like a stump. Tawny. Again, these are all like just textured brushes. Oh boy, I do know French. D'Entre Casteau. Texture again. Glover. Again, just different textures. Like you'd have to kind of go through these if you want to use them. Furno. It's a little animal printish, actually. Maybe that's why it's Furno. And then there's stubble, so I don't know if this is like to make a beard on someone, or a stubbly beard, because there's hair down here as well. Noise brush, so this is like TV static. Old skin, looks kind of reptilian skin, not really human, unless it's a real close up. And then rough skin. And then zombie skin. Is that what zombie skin looks like? And then there's fine hair, flowing hair, and short hair. I don't know why that's short hair, but you know, there's more strokes to that one, basically. Like, I don't know if you would use it to like make shorter hair. I don't really draw people very often, if you don't know. I'm not really a illustrationist, I'm more of a lettering artist. I've said that before, but if you haven't known, that's me. So again, I don't really use these. But that's in the materials, so then vintage. So these are all kind of, you know, 60s and 70s retro kind of feel to them. This one's got that pressure sensitivity with size. But it's got that kind of, they look kind of like pills, like as the texture. Honey eater is kind of like honeycombs. Make it bigger. Oh, that's too big. Sort of like honeycombs. But anyway, that is that. Then there is Galaxius. But it's got, like, this is one of those, like, you can make the entire texture kind of thing. Campania. This one's kind of streaky. But it's got that texture, like a retro type texture to it. Wedge tail. This one's like a flat brush. A little bit of opacity pressure sensitivity, but that's it. Like, it doesn't get bigger. Groovy. This would probably be a lot better with different colors, not black, but bolt. So this one's gonna be lightning bolts. That's the shape that it uses. And you can also like stamp those on. But again, this one's kind of like got that randomized like orientation. So if you were going to stamp it, you might want to, well, that one turned out okay and fine, but like if that turned out that way, you might want to select it and change it, transform it. But that's that. So then there's Fever. This is more of a texture, like a background texture, but that is, you know, very retro. Newsprint. Woo! It's because I don't have a screen protector. I don't use one. My tip getting worn out? No, doesn't look like it. Okay, Buzz. This one is kind of honeycombish if you look at the original shape. And I guess you could stamp it like that. But if you're dragging it along, like it's just kind of dragging a honeycomb along. Disco. This one's very retro. And it's got that pressure sensitivity. When you push harder, it gets bigger. The opacity stays the same, though, on this one. And then there's Rad. And then Flower Power. This is another easily retro one. And this is kind of smaller, but you can make it bigger as well. And you can also stamp these. And I think these get bigger if you push harder and a little bit more opaque. But you can put that kind of flower power-ish background if you wanted that. So then luminance is the next category. These have to do with light. That's why it's called luminance. So here's flare. This one is like a stamp brush, so it's kind of large. You can drag it along, but it's more of a like stamp it in kind of thing. Oops. Then a light pen, so you're going to see like the light coming out in this. Well, not when you use black though, because there's no brightness to that or luminance. So let's try a different color on this one for sure. Let's try this. Well, let's try this green. So because there is a little bit of brightness to that green, it shows out the like white color in the middle of the pen. So it kind of looks neon. Like you can make like a neon sort of thing. There's also light brush. So the difference is like this one's a little more streaky and it's larger and it's got a little more of that pressure sensitivity to it, and it gets very bright too when you push it harder. Much brighter than when you don't push it as hard. So then there's pulse. So when you stamp it, it doesn't do much, but if you're bringing it along, and it does change color a little bit with how hard you're pressing. All right, let's go back to flare because we use black with that. What is the secret with this one? I'm not sure. All right, I guess, so if you keep putting them on top of each other, they get a little brighter. I guess. I wasn't sure about that one. All right, anyway, the bokeh lights. This one changes color a bit and opacity with pressure. But it gives you kind of a unique background that you can use if you're trying to use it for like making a quote or something, which is something I do often. Light leak. Ooh, this one's like really blurry. It kind of hurts my vision. Glimmer, so that's going to give you like, shiny appearance. Let's bring it down a little bit. So then, yeah, when you push harder, it gets bigger and it gets more spread out. And I think it gets a little lighter as well, like that glowing part of it comes out a little more the more you push hard. And then nebula also gives you a nice background kind of look too. And you can experiment with different colors and stuff. So that's that. And then industrial is going to give you like industrial kind of textures. So I could probably move back to black, but like this is what is this? Caged. And then heavy metal. Oops. Heavy metal. Again, these are all textures. Wasteland. Twisted tree. Some of these I know, where they get the name from. Some of them I don't. Stone wall. Looks like a stone wall. That was one of them that's pretty obvious. Rusted decay. Concrete block. And then corrugated iron. These are all kind of, again, industrial type textures that you can use. So then there's organic. Actually, I think I should keep green for these for sure. So spires. Again, this is a texture thing. These are all kind of texture things. Rainforest. So this is like if you want to make like tops of trees, you could do that with this. Or like clouds. Snow gum. I don't know why it's called that. It looks like a bunch of leaves, but okay. But they do get bigger if you push harder and more spread out. And they change color a little bit, like they get a little darker. And then mountain ash. Again, just a texture. Paper daisy. So yeah, it's got that. I mean, these are like bunches of leaves, but that's kind of the shape. And then, if you do it this way, it follows, and you can have you can make like a shrub out of it or a tree. And then swordgrass. So it's an easy way to kind of draw grass in your scene if you need it. And then there's wild grass. It's a little bit different looking grass. And then twig. I don't know why it's called twig, but it's kind of a streaky, natural texture. Reed. If this has got that pressure sensitivity, and if it's not, you're not putting pressure on, it's a little streaky, but otherwise it isn't. Bamboo. It's a little, like this is more of a wet kind of brush, or like a wet acrylic, or it's got that streaky kind of look to it until you layer it more. And then there's sable. This is definitely a little streaky. Hemp. Clay. I mean, that does kind of look like clay, so again, depending on what you're drawing, this might make it a little easier. Cotton, if you want to draw some cotton, or like cloudy kind of stuff. This is Hessian. This is another kind of grassy look, depending on what you're trying to make. It's a little more randomized. And then the last category is water. So these again are kind of like very watered down. These go good with a smudge brush. But this is like a wet sponge. Like this is very cloudy looking too. You can make clouds with this. Wet glaze. Wash. Mad splashes. It depends on how big this is. I mean, it does get bigger, more pressure. And this is meant to be more of a stamp brush, but you can kind of drag it along. And then there's water flicks. More of a, like again, after you're kind of done with your watercolor and you want to flick some water on it, like some people do. That's kind of what that is. And you have to kind of adjust the shape and the size, or the size basically, for depending on what you're doing. But this is another kind of blotch that you can put in intentionally. Or you can make like a coffee stain or something. And then there's water drip, which is very similar to like the spray paint drip, but it's a little different. Just to show you, that one's got a little bit of a different shape to it. So, but that is all the brushes. Again, we're going to go over, I'm going to probably use a few of these as examples when we go through the Brush Studio, so we'll go over a little bit more of that, but you have a little bit of an intro to that, and that's probably going to be, you know, more interesting, more you want to learn. So this is just kind of to show you what all these brushes do that come with Procreate, to give you a jumping off point on like what you're trying to do and what might work good for that. So that was what this video was supposed to be about. So we went through all the brushes, and next video is going to be all about the Brush Studio, and we're going to go through all those categories and show you like basically how a brush is made, and we're going to go through some of these, like I said, some good examples of like this category was changed for this brush basically. So you'll see that in the next video, but that's it for today. So see you next time. Alright, now that this video is done, we still are going to take a look at the Brush Studio together. Just a warning, that video is probably going to be very long. I've gone back and forth about maybe I should split it up into different videos, but I think I'm just going to make it one. It's probably going to be very long. So I'm going to be going through all those things in the Brush Studio that you can change to change the way your brush reacts on the canvas. But also, you can make your own brushes from scratch too. So we're going to be going through all like what all those things do individually, and then once we do that in a separate video or a couple separate videos, I'm going to be talking about how you can make certain brushes, so like certain types of brushes. So there'll be a few of those, and there may be more of those sporadically afterwards, after we go through this series too, but I'm going to go over like the very basic ones first in this series, and then after that we're going to get into the animation assist feature in Procreate, and then again we're going to go through and do a few different types of animation that you can do on Procreate, kind of examples of what you can do. And again, those will be coming out sporadically afterwards as well, but we'll start with a few like right after this video, the animation assist video. And then once we get a few of those done, I have one more category that's miscellaneous. I went over some of those things in that intro video, but I'm going to go over them again in this video. Plus there's other things that I didn't go over at all. So that will all be kind of like all the stuff that doesn't really fit in all the other categories that I had on here. So after we're done with that video, technically this series will be done, the Procreate for Beginners series, and then we're going to start doing some projects. So we'll start with easier stuff obviously first, and then we'll get a little more advanced as time goes on and kind of bounce around between beginner and advanced a little bit. But those project related videos will take a bunch of these concepts together in a more practical way rather than the way you're learning them now, which is kind of isolated. So it'll all start making more sense once we start doing things. So thank you for watching and sticking around, and I promise there's more practical things coming. So see you soon with the next video.